All right. All righty. Well, so now we come to the place where we begin to ask ourselves, we begin to ask ourselves, what is it that we look for? What is it that we look for when we study the productions of time? What is it that we are looking for? What is our criteria for valuing what it is that is worthwhile in what we study of the productions of time? And it is of the productions of time that such a scientist as Ibn Khaldun is interested in. It is the productions of time, the productions of a specific time and place in our sense of the chronological flow of human consciousness, but also a specific time and place where lives are lived and fortunes are made and human meanings are found and human beings suffer and human beings solve problems and human beings confront the questions that still concern us now. It is of this kind of subject matter that we come to Ibn Khaldun, looking for the criteria of how we are to judge and weigh the value of what it is that we, in our interpretation of history. That's another question. Whom or what do we serve in our interpretation of history? And by token of that, whom or what inspires the energy? I almost wanted to say mental energy. And of course, that is true, but to say mental energy is as if to say the wave of the water or the specific particle in the ocean, whereas in actuality, the approach that Ibn Khaldun is taking to the expression of thought is, in and of itself, the origin of absolutely original criteria of meaning. So we talk about it in this way to begin with, but hopefully a little bit can be specified. A little bit can be specified as we go on, and then we can maybe build out from that, because this is the way that Ibn Khaldun and his thought proceeds. So a process of thought is going on from the consciousness of Ibn Khaldun, and the form it is taking is in the pages of these texts. Along with the pages of the texts are an endless number of other surfaces, because partially, and this is one partial aspect of his originality, Ibn Khaldun is a commentator. He is a describer of what we all see before us in time and space. So it's not like he's practicing something original in that way. No, it's more like the works as a whole become a forest with its own ecosystem of ideas and expressions and things that it will inspire in you, because it's utterly inspiring, utterly generative to approach Ibn Khaldun's thought, getting close to the very energy behind his thought, because it is a common and universal human energy. What is in Ibn Khaldun is in Walt Whitman, and we have it on Walt Whitman's authority that what is in him is also in you see, whether we know it or not. So it's that kind of universalistic kind of appeal, and yet it's utterly particular. And so that is why it'll go off in places where it seems to make sense, but what does it really mean? And it is this response from us that is the gateway to the original teaching that Ibn Khaldun has for us, because he was a teacher. To call him a teacher is to unite two qualities, two characteristics of Ibn Khaldun as a writer, is to unite them into one thing. He is a teacher, okay? But let's look. This is like the root form, but let's make a cluster, a trial web cluster, with two lines coming out diagonal, descending. And on either side, we will put a box that will have the two literary traditions that Ibn Khaldun is so exemplary of. And one is Well, you know, there is no equivalent to it. Some could call it Bell's letters, but like, you know, this is a generalist. And yeah, this has meaning. I mean, the way that I want to put it, it's as a poetics of generalization. It is as a formulator of creative generalizations. And that as like almost the primary building block of this as a style, as a writerly style. So let's include now an important part of a literary tradition that is common to both of these boxes. So, okay, the first box is the writer of eloquence, the generalist, the seeker of the principles, though, in the generalizations, which leads to further and further generalizations. And then every now and then a certain trail is set off on, and that is the trail of specifications. And those seeming to be inductive steps are actually the ones that open on to wider and wider areas of illumination, like a pinball machine with a strange magnetic kind of frequency about it that's not randomly accessed, but more like there's this divergence between the two ways things can be in their most general presentation. And then there's this unification of them all seemingly in a single moment, And it's that kind of mind that Ibn Khaldun is an example of as a generalist and as a writer. But there's another element of that, which I will come back to. But let me go to this other element. And that is Ibn Khaldun is working in a very rich and charged and yet very restricted kind of area of interpretation, because essentially it's I don't know how to reach for the equivalent of it. It's an expert, but that's not quite the word. A mage, no, that's not quite the word either. But he's a juridical authority. Maybe that's the word. A juridical authority, and he's functioning in the society, which is connected, between the religious and the secular and the economic and the social and the customs in ways that us contemporary people pretend that we understand, but actually we don't understand it because it's actually much more familiar to us in kind of a way underneath in terms of how these societies evolve, And it's like the energies that come from underneath and how societies evolve are actually the energies that generate all the different kind of ideas with all their different kind of vulnerable and open places, because there is not a cultural interpretive kind of like measure even there in a certain sense. And so because of that, we assume things. We assume to know, but we really don't know. But that's okay. That's the human condition. But what comes from underneath is something that always surprises us, because thinking that we know, we don't know that we don't know until we're reminded in this all-at-once kind of way with this illumination, this uncovering, this revelation of something that is familiar because it is appearing to us in a very original way, just like that, like an unveiling, right? Like a revelation. And yet at the same time, these perceptions, proto-perceptions, pre-perceptions, post-perceptions, interpretations, become the basis of the structure of legal systems and law and different ways that values are measured, including, of course, the intangible values and the criteria by which these values are to be weighed. Systematic and yet endless, and sometimes suddenly, you reach some juncture that is vulnerable, it's like a nervous current. It's like the nervous system of human consciousness. Any kind of legal structure is a thought from the nervous system as an image of itself, saying from this great pool of need in the collective unconscious, here are what we think of our values. Here, take care of us. What are we? We are signals from your nerve endings. Oh, animus mundi. Oh, collective body politic. We are these things coming from your nervous system. And, so that means the judge is like a physician, could it not be? Because in meaningfully engaging in a structural and inspired way with the needs that the body politic has in its emotions and thoughts, to be to have a reflection of itself that will belong to it as a check against its own excesses, and also all the possible cases arising from that. And this is the science of jurisprudence. This is the body of content of jurisprudence. Ibn Khaldun is trained probably 2 or 3 generations back in this tradition. It is handed down in the family, this scribal interpretive tradition. Let's just say this is where we will look at that in as a way of understanding one of the kinds of writers that Ibn Khaldun is. So we have the literary generalist with a seething curiosity and a seemingly inexhaustible supply of surfaces upon which to rest ideas that may or may not be true. And he will test these ideas and apply to them certain criteria of things that he has learned in the context of jurisprudence. But suddenly looking out at the world with this boundless and seething, insatiable, ravenous, voracious kind of curiosity. The light falls on places the light has never fallen before. The same light shining upon legal strictures and tenets and theoretical cases and considerations and possibilities and punishments and checks and balances and all of this. That same mind breathes this in and then breathes out and looks at the world and sees, the rising and falling of the various kingdoms and the movement of things seen and unseen through the body politic. And this is where it's like a diamond, where these two things meet, actually, the creative generalist and the, dedicated, doctor of jurisprudence. They meet in this place where the traditions meet in this entire body of philosophical and spiritual and theological and scientific and in this common tradition, this deeper fund. It's like these. It is an outpouring from an original source, and the original source is, in terms of the literary forms in the world that Ibn Khaldun is moving in, the original form is the Quran. And the Quran is the conceptual worldly form, as I said, as William Blake said, and I quote, eternity is in love with the products of time. Eternity is in love with the products of time. Or, as it says in the pages of the Quran, I was a hidden treasure and I desired to be known. And then it came upon, Muhammad in this way, in all these unveilings, one after the other, an arduous process. But a work was brought forth spontaneously. I'm ever so generality laden in my description of it. But from it, I think we can draw what will be usable for us. It was a work of dictation, a work of audiation. It was an epiphanic manifestation of an archetypal figure representing what is to some a word and to others a name: God. And so you don't have to worry about your conception of the literalness of this, folks, because this is the myth of the mythic structure of the Abrahamic divine idea. The Abrahamic divine idea. It's a separate I should say, discrete category of myth, which we can assign certain works and certain elements of certain works to, an outpouring of utterance about the ultimate nature of things, which is in a language that encompasses worlds known and unknown, and creates not only an entire genre, but an entire culture, an entire way of looking at the world, and an entire forest, an entire ecosystem, just almost like what Ibn Khaldun is a microcosm of, of this embodiment of inspiration. That's what I'm talking about now. What is it when I say the word God? Or what is it when I say the word theism? Or let's play around and specify at the same time. What is it if I say the word cosmopolitan theism? What if I say that cosmopolitan theism is the, perhaps the, primary image of this age of the energy of meaning? And that would be simply, this notion of what is a word for some is a name for others. Really, that's all. It's not a matter of believing in one thing or believing in something else. How could it be? I mean, this thing, belief, which fills the character in the success story with such strength and superhuman capacity that such a character would swim oceans. What if I tell you that a group of characters, because of the conviction, the strength of their beliefs, swam oceans, climbed mountains, endured storms for the sake of wisdom, and what they believed in was themselves and the embodiment of the central ideas of the myth in the form as they knew it, which gave them this, what would they call, strength of character, belief to endure such, all for the purpose, and this is a different quality of something that dwells within the human spirit, all for the purpose of wisdom and of finding wisdom. In this case, it was a journey to the wise man on top of the mountain. And they did get there. And they sat at the feet of the wise man, and they pledged to the wise man, as was the custom in the culture and cultures before the cultures from which they came. They pledged their every capacity of their ability to understand. They said, "Oh, Master, we make this available from ourselves to you so that we will be instructed. We are willing to undergo the unknown in what we may learn through you." And the Master replied, "Oh, so you are asking me for your belief? Is that what it is?" They said, "Yes, Master, we offer you our belief. We give you our belief. The Master said, strength of character, Master, of this we have an abundance relative to the worlds we come from. We offer this to you and lay it at your feet for the sake of instruction in wisdom. Your strength of character," said the Master, "and your belief as well. Are you willing to believe what I say to you?" "Yes, Master." "Are you willing to understand what I give to you?" "Yes, Master." "Are you willing to believe that you understand what I will give to you?" "Yes, Master, with all our strength and being." "Ah, so I am asking you to believe something now," said the Master. And they said, "Anything, we will believe it." And the Master said, "Then believe this. I am not here. I am not here. I am not here." And at this, the would-be disciples were stunned. And they looked at one another, as if to say, is this still okay? But they did dare to tell the truth. They had that. That's what comes from such self-belief, on the superhuman plane, and nevertheless human. There is a certain daring about it, which is what, the poets remember in the heroic chronicles. This is why it endures in our way of understanding things. And so they dared to say to the Master an even greater word, no. An even greater word, they might have said, even though up to now the story represents them as ignorant, but they were the ones who said, no, no, Master. We cannot believe that. We cannot believe that you are not there. And the Master at that point could have played games with them, and the Master actually would have said, no, you're not listening to me. What I said was, I am not here. And then they would have answered, yes, but we see you as there and you are not there. And then, it's off to the races. That would have been if that had been an actual student place where students gather, if that had been an actual school, if that had been an actual madrasa or ashram or whatever, kindergarten or whatever the name for school is, any kind of gathering, grove, academy, where people are there to learn from those who know to those who have inklings of knowledge. But that's not what this place was. It was the top of a mountain where this wise man lived. We could say that he was a hermit, but we have to say he lived a very social existence because things like this happened all the time. But anyway, the Master said, "What? I say believe. You say you will. And I say, I am not here. And you say, no, you are there. This is what our eyes tell us." And so there, the Master said, then be on your way. If you do not have the impetus to follow the own path that you set to and agreed to, how could it be that it wouldn't be that? I will tell you this. I will tell you this. Now I realize I've got to work more for humanity. This is my service. This is what I must endure to live here on top of the mountain where the cold winds blow. I have to tell you something. So, okay, I'll tell you something true. The true thing that I will tell you is you live your lives in such a way that you outrun the words that come to you in the expression of what you know from day to day. But what the word leads you to that is beyond the word, that is something that you do not see. And staying here, you would see a veiled version of it, which is what you think is me, but really I'm not here. And so it's like I am the veil that you cannot see through. I am actually you, the Master might say. I am you, because there is the veil that you put between you and what you seek to know. And that veil is made from the pretensions of your subjective personality, or the dragon of your ignorance, or what we would say in our secular psychological world, your ego. And it's fine to put it that way too. This is a veil. This functions as a veil between you and what is really there. Be on your way. And then he sends them on their way rudely. And they leave because now they've got their graduate degree in hand. Do they? No. Instead, they have the burning desire to understand the meaning of their experience, which before it wasn't there. It was a mastery of a certain level of experience, but that had to be left behind if they were to come closer to that which they seek. So every idea in Ibn Khaldun proceeds in a certain way, only the inspiration is not transmitted to you in the way I just, kind of like have presented. It's because it's secular. And yet, at the same time, it cannot be secular without also including the divine in this, kind of dynamic movement. Anyway, so Ibn Khaldun, he was a juridical teacher. He was an adventurous and creative and original generalist. And because of that, these things led him into a study and an understanding of society, which generated endless criteria which to explore and ask and seek and understand. The surfaces of a diamond, you might say. And as you know, as the surfaces proliferate and interrelate and reflect together, that is how surfaces transform into depths. you see. And that is the level that we're working on now with Ibn Khaldun. And, it's the crystallization I'm talking about. The crystallization was his own adventure in his mind. What he was looking at was actually peril and destruction. These were loaded, explosive, and dangerous times Ibn Khaldun was living in the 14th century. He was born in 1370 and lived until 1406, or 1332 and lived until 1406. I think it's something like this. And this encompassed a time, in that part of the country when imagine, if you will, a closeness to a place in such a way that the landscape seems to breathe with this recent memory of civilizations coming and going, of dynasties and kingdoms rising and falling, sometimes with great rapidity, one after the other. I mean, there is everything in the notion of what later, the nascent notion of a nation state. The nascent notion of a nation state existed, but that's just what we say, having drawn from that thread, having pulled on that thread to create this notion of a nation state. But to them, Ibn Khaldun was looking at courts, dynasties, zones and intrigues of power which were simultaneously utterly intimate, because these people all were educated in the same places and studied the same things, but because of certain dynastic and heredity kind of like associations and transmissions of power, along with at times it was overwhelmingly dominant, and other times it receded depending on the ethics and morals of the ruling powers that be. But this would constantly change anyway. And Ibn Khaldun, in a certain sense, you could say he was a courtier. Well, that's just another thing another way we could describe him. You see, he worked at times intensely amidst these zones of intrigue, vying for position, which is what they did, and this is a very unique world, the world of the courtier, those, who seek to be powers behind the throne or influencers of each other for all these various reasons. And nowhere are the good and the evil put so close together. Nowhere are the visionary and the base, brought so close together, which is why Shakespeare and other people are drawn to these kind of places to see certain archetypal, interrelations of character and ambition and stuff. And Ibn Khaldun moved in these places when in his early in middle adulthood, and later on too, but in a different form somewhat. He was educated. His family originally came from Yemen, and then during the time when the Umayyad or Abbasid, civilization or dynasty was established and living, breathing in an expansive kind of way, and these forms of thought were becoming put into positions where eternity and being in love with time could find forms of her engagement in these cultural forms that were being established in these desert places, all the way into Spain, of course, and all the way into many other areas too. And so Ibn Khaldun's forebears went from Yemen up through into Spain near Seville, and were there for some number of generations. But the tides of history began to change, and they came back to where they had originally come from, which was Tunisia. You see, Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunisia, actually. His family had moved there. I believe his parents actually were the ones who came back to Tunisia, or I should say, their more distant origins were from Yemen, but they came to and from Seville, to and back from Seville to Tunisia, and northern Africa, what they call the Maghreb, this entire region, and by the time that Ibn Khaldun he was taught, I want to say that this is very important for us in a certain understanding. It seems our notions of education have such rigid templates that I sometimes hesitate to speak of the way that Ibn Khaldun was educated, because to say he was homeschooled it sounds too contemporary. Oh, that means this and this. And well, it wasn't quite like that, but it was more like there would be places and times where in the household of the caliph, or the household, yeah, or whatever ruler in whatever position in that household, there would be attached, a kind of a retinue of different kind of teachers. This is how Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great in Macedonia. This resonates factually as well as mythically. And that was one way to get educated. And then, but at this time and in this place, it was being established various institutions of learning, and such that we are familiar with the word madrasa now, but it means school. And what the real issue is not whether or not we call it madrasa or kanka or tarika. I don't even. I'm talking about many forms of education to reflect the many disciplines, the many ways of understanding the nature of the sacred word, the many ways of understanding the implications of the sacred word. We're back to that also, that notion that the Quran is the form of forms. It's the prototype. It is the progenitor of cultures and civilizations, and a reflector of consciousnesses, exfoliating and carrying itself into fruit and seed and vine and plant, And this is how it is anyway, but in northern Africa, in the Maghreb, Ibn Khaldun was moving through these kind of zones of intrigue. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. As a child, he was educated in his family home, because the curriculum of the madrasa was too restrictive. And let me speak of it in an so general way when I tell you that the first, he later on said in one place that the first thing a child should be taught is calculus. And we go, what is this? But you've got to understand that this is a translation of a a translation from a language which, in and of itself, each syllable is like a creative exfoliation, almost like a living organic puzzle piece of the other in the roots of its etymologies relative to the philosophical meanings of what they're saying. Because, and this is the gift of the Abrahamic revelation, God is a God expressing the being of God through qualities. And the qualities are, well, in reality, they are infinite, but we have come to understand and focus our building of our understanding into these forms of these 101 names, right? Names. It is names that the qualities of God are communicated to our human mind through names. And the names mean splendid qualities, and the names also are versions of themselves. And the versions of each word and each name interrelate in all these ways, you see, and this has ramifications in the legal zones, of course, and in the artistic zones, and in the diplomatic zones, and all of these different zones, and these are the foundations of urban civilizations. There we are, at last. Urban civilizations is what Ibn Khaldun is moving in the circles of power of. Medieval in certain senses, but at the same time utterly contemporary. I may not say modern, but at the same time also is arising this urban civilization and this urban culture and this urban economy. And he is eager, he is nourished by his muse, is fed by his description of the minute particulars, as William Blake would say. Those who love God come to love God in terms of the minute particulars. And so he would chronicle the minute particulars and find some very disturbing things, of course, because for some reason it was given to his mind to understand the structural principles of what was happening around him. Now, this is partially true, and let's just say it to just put him in a certain kind of like general history. Prior to Ibn Khaldun, let's put it this way, his originality as a stylist is such that we can look at the development of style and understanding in the thought of this form of literature at this time and realize that prior to Ibn Khaldun and his writings, history and other things are narrations of events. And basically, the surfaces of events. And of course, the poets draw from that. Everything can be drawn from that, because from the surface of events, one can imagine, with the help of the muse, in one's imagination, a great fullness and an original conception of it, which can then be a work of art, and then inspire all others, in that own way. But before Ibn Khaldun, it's surface descriptions of events, and then Ibn Khaldun begins to express these ideas, and it is there have to be these criteria to account for the analysis. Well, these things are happening in the interests of the zones of power and the various things that are being done in the royal courts, whereas in the town and on the streets, living is being done just like living is being done here, and human reality has all these forms and facets that are constantly changing. And then, of course, something threatens from the outside, and this is Ibn Khaldun sees urban civilizations rising up of necessity, because this is the way it is happening. This is what is. This is Ibn Khaldun's phenomenological this is the content of his phenomenological parentheses, and that is this urban civilization, these danger zones of thought and idea all around him, rising and falling civilizations are doing. And why is it happening? How can you understand this monumental, cataclysmic occasion without having recourse to something in your inspiration that is not known to you at that moment? And Ibn Khaldun is the conduit through which, no, it can be known to us what is happening in a certain way, and it is being known. And then Ibn Khaldun would express it, something again and again, depending on what the theme was. He would say, urban civilizations are rising, and yet they are falling at the same time in so many ways, in so many dimensions. It seems to be, this notion of this cyclical reality, this reverberation of not of sound, but of event or occurrence. And what are the characteristics, or what are the forces that make this happen, that are happening in this way? He looks into himself, and he looks into his own forebearers, and he sees there were many, many peoples that flow in this blood. Not sure if he put it exactly in this way. I wonder. I can imagine some Arabic writers who would. But in the zones of these veins are the blood of many, many peoples. The Berbers, for example. He was a descendant of Muhammad. He as many families do, I think it's, there are many ways that this can be true. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the land in Tunisia and Morocco and all these places, what they are now known as, at that time were also desert tribal societies and nomadic pastoral cultures. And the word we use is Berbers. There's probably more precise words that that perhaps we will be beginning to use as time goes on. But these were the Bedouin, right? The nomadic peoples. They were pastoralists and yes, farmers too at certain times, seasonal. And their relation to the land and their culture, in relation to that, and even the way that they practiced their religion was so categorically different from the way life was lived among all the different occupants of the urban civilization, that you could draw certain really compelling kind of pictures of these dynamic qualities in both of these styles of life and peoples. But what was also happening was these are clashing times, as I mentioned, explosive times. And what was happening so often was the pastoral people, the people outside the thick fortified city gates, were living such a life of not only poverty, but also discipline and hardness and toil and adventure, and also an excitement a feeling between them, which could be a martial kind of spirit, but also like a faith in each other and a trust in each other, and seeing the world through the same eyes, that it gave their culture a more dynamic kind of energy, so that when the cultures did clash, because this is the nature of, human nature in this way, Ibn Khaldun, was very much, we would call it a realist now, but I would say that you got to understand the energy as the energy manifests itself, but you've got to always see the commonality that you have with it. And that commonality, if it comes to be a place of vision where you understand it, then you must explain and describe and become a generalist, which is how it was for Ibn Khaldun. But so there was this constant kind of recycling kind of quality where the pastoral and nomadic civilizations would gather in strength and force and intrinsic kind of energy and kind of like overcome, like a wave out of the innerness of human nature, a wave out of the innerness of masses of people, to bring about these successions of civilization and different kinds of manifestations. But always it was kind of this cycle between the nomadic kind of values expressed in certain actions which caused the urban civilizations to be overcome, and then the peoples who overcame these urban civilizations themselves begin to take on the external form of urban civilization and all its ways of life, which brings about, after times of rising and falling culminations, usually within 3 generations, I mean, sometimes he had it codified in that way, then that falls, and then the next phase of the cycle happens. And what is it that is the theory of this way of seeing and this way of understanding? And here we could be speaking of it, in scientific terms, because what we're talking about, objective criteria. Yeah, we're talking about objective criteria, but all of a sudden, it seems that we enter into a space where the magnetics are slightly different. I think that just like when we understand theism, we understand it as being a way of being where it is acknowledged that what is a word to some is a name to others. Well, also in the way of in the way of conceiving of the inner energy of life, we have to allow for the creation of certain criteria that appear under our feet as the steps we take, in this kind of like realm of thought and expression. Zoom, so it goes into that, but then it has to come back to some basic principle. And this is where Ibn Khaldun, again and again, what I seem to be doing in my own mind here is just manifesting in my own sense of him the way that he proceeds in his imaginative creations, which is to arrive suddenly at the point where things are most diffuse, at a statement of the principle that he's talking about, which is completely new. And in this case, this is a landmark by which we can come to know him and orient ourselves as we begin to come to understand his vast contribution. And that is the notion of Abbasiyya. It is Abbasiyya that Ibn Khaldun brings to us and introduces us to the contemplation of. And first of all, it comes from a writer and a thinker who is so steeped in the juridical tradition that the awareness of the polyvalent nature of the meaning of words is already something that was known to him at a young age, and he continued to learn from the very moment that he began to be educated of the nature of the polyvalence of words and the meanings of the words in the different ways and different contexts that they can be used to carry imaginative or thought energy, and also it has some connection to action and actions taken and the consequences of actions, which include the rise and fall of civilizations. And so Abbasiyya, it is a neologism, basically, I want to say this. And he does this a lot. The words are used by way of, in their legal structure, he's aware of how analogies and there's a science of analogy, don't you know? And the science of analogy allows the juridical thinker to see the different ways that different principles expressed in different cases, otherwise unrelated, under the same kind of like purview of analogy, the same divine idea can be seen as being expressed in both of these things alongside of each other, even though they're separated conceptually, far apart from each other at every step, you know. And so he's aware of words in this way, and then he will do neologisms occasionally, just to keep everybody aware that he's on a whole other level of thought, you know. And so we could call Abbasiyya a neologism, you know, a creative neologism, but, you know, it comes from, like all good neologisms do, you know, they go out into the world, you know, on the breath of a thinker, and they go and do their thing, you know, here and there, you know. It's almost like an adventure that they undertake in their lives. And then at a certain point, though, it's time for the neologism to come home. The neologism comes home to the root meaning of the word and the idea or the theme from which it first set out. And we, in our age, we only look at the neologism or any other word as something that is just going on this daytime walkabout, and we do not see where it arises from or what it goes back to. We should start our analysis in those kind of places. Like I say, what comes up to us kind of from underneath is these kinds of awarenesses. And Ibn Khaldun can, not only will he, from how many years ago was it, you know, 700 years ago, something like this, we are inspired by him even today conceptually, you know, in a spontaneous kind of manner, because as I'm saying it to you now, it's somewhat in the spirit of the way that he wrote it, you know, and but I can't argue with you in that way. Instead, I offer you the proof in the things, you know, of the ideas as they appear. So what is Abbasiyya? Well, when the word is done doing its walkabout, you know, and who knows when that, or maybe that already has happened, but, you know, or maybe it's happened long ago, you know, maybe I'm just now waking up to the fact. But it means something to do with Abbasa, something with connection, but also it could mean twist. I don't know if it could mean connection or not, or interrelationship. I am sure, you know, our Buddhist brothers and sisters will bring to us an awareness via this interpreted notion of independent co-arising, you know, of this kind of like mysterious and elusive nature of causality. Well, whereas Ibn Khaldun, you know, is talking about this like energy of like connection, connectedness, and he's just, for him, it's the only way it works to describe what he sees. When he sees the morale, you know, the dynamo of these Berber cultures, and what seems to happen again and again, you know, militarily and culturally, and even in terms of personal inner kind of like mental energy expressed in these different actions in all these different ways. Well, what is it that accounts for this like imbalance of energy, which must right itself as a succession of civilizations? Well, what is that? Is what he calls Abbasiyya. Abbasiyya, connection, the collective way of life. You know, you might say collective way of life. Some people say it's simple enough, and maybe they're right, to just call it group feeling, right? Group ethos, esprit de corps. We have plenty of examples of our own that we could bring to it also, you know. And anyway, this is what Abbasiyya is, and this is how he accounts for it. And by this, every time he separates these kind of ideas, for example, urban from rural, or pastoral from agricultural, or, you know, commercial or mercantile from aristocratic, or, you know, military from scribal, you know, he's always kind of referring it back to this kind of basic, kind of this dynamic node of interplay. The thought is very much, you know, a constellation of the way that this kind of nervous system energy of this genre, you know, or of this body of artistic endeavor. That's what I have to call it. That's the only way I can understand it. It expresses itself in these kind of like volatile and volatilizing nodes and clusters of webs and of association, you see. And at least that's the only way I can take that ball and roll with it. But I'm rolling with it as best I can in the way that it comes to me, you know, and take that for what it is. I'm not sure. I could be one of those people that they were interested in educating us out of the great inspired thinkers. Ibn Khaldun refers again and again, and here we're going into a different area of Ibn Khaldun. He goes again and again, he refers to one of the greatest thinkers of all time, and that is Ghazali, al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali wrote such books, I don't know, some hundred of years or so before Ibn Khaldun. I don't know, he wrote such books as The Refutation of the Philosophers, what was it? It was the refutation of error, or it was on the incoherence of the philosophers. On the incoherence of philosophers, the refutation of error. And also these kind of books where again and again he seems to be, well, I cannot tell you the entire message, but let me put it in this way. When we're speaking of an exfoliating body of literature, imaginative and as well as legal and historical, which arises from an essentially revealed kind of conceptual understanding, which we are when we're talking about these Quranic kind of thinkers. We have to take into account that there will be, the essential thing is this: what is it that makes a word to others, a name to some? That is unity of concept. And so when Al-Ghazali is talking about the refutation of the philosophers, what he's actually doing, he's trying to assert like the nature of this kind of magnetic center around which all the philosophies, which were basically, what is the philosophy but the inner meaning of the word? What is the philosophy but the inner meaning of the concept? And what is common to the inner meaning of all the concepts, no matter their changes or the ways they are changed by human inspiration or human ignorance? What is the central source of all these concepts? Well, it is Allah. It is the One. And so a thinker like Ibn Khaldun and Al-Ghazali I'm speaking specifically of now, because Al-Ghazali will express that, in this refutational way. You can hear that in the titles, the refutational kind of way, moralistic kind of way. But it is also, though, what is happening underneath is this, inspired and visionary appreciation, perception of the understanding of conceptual unity, of the common energy, which is the energy of meaning in all of these things. Now, that's a philosophical statement, is it? Well, yes, we've come to know it that way. Al-Ghazali would say perhaps it is a theological statement, or maybe Al-Ghazali, well, he would say it is true. And that really is more accurate, And so the unity of all of these concepts. And, what was one result of that, if I want to put it a little bit hyperbolically and a little bit dramatically and a little bit like Shakespeareanly? Al-Ghazali, saved a lot of lives when he did that. He's saving a lot of lives now. He's exemplifying muse power. What I say to you is, when you exemplify muse power, that is what is poetic in your philosophical or your theological or your polemical or your juridical or your belles lettres or your generalizations. That is what is operative in it. Muse power is what saves lives. And what saves lives is what inspires. And so we can also look at Ibn Khaldun when we say he's a teacher, jumping back into that. What is a teacher but a giver of inspiration in all these different ways through kooky explanations? When I say kooky explanations, I'm speaking, for fun that way. But there is that kind of energy in Ibn Khaldun, which is more, it's a surplus of itself, which energizes it all the more. I believe that. I was trying to get back to something. Oh, yeah. Here we are. He saved a lot of lives. And by conveying inspiration, energy, moving in mysterious ways, always to benefit human consciousness. But also in a more literal way and traceable way by establishing a basis for a mystic to have kind of like a steady kind of like orientation to navigate one's boat through the stormy seas of all the things that inspire us, to which we somehow are also simultaneously extremely vulnerable to. He provides a system or a form of navigation. How? Well, because all ideas are unities, by drawing from the source an original idea. We know it's from the source because it's original, an original idea of being, which he gave the name to adab, a quality of being, a discipline, a theory, an ascesis, a praxis, a practice, adab. It could also be translated as courtesy. It certainly is, and like chivalry and chivalric codes, which are also related to legal codes, which are also related to the secret codes, that romantics speak in. We always, think how much these thinkers from Northern Africa and Arabia, with these kind of thoughts intermingling with the peoples all around them, with their art forms and their ways of thought and their ways of conceiving of the divine. And, that is a gift that keeps on giving always, though we find all these ways not to be aware of it, But, this is how it is. But he saved a lot of lives, Ghazali did, with this notion of adab as a thing that you could teach, as something that you could begin to educate human beings toward in the evolution of their consciousness, in the ways of adab, in the ways of courtesy, in the ways where, and this was how it fit into the controversies of the day. We can misunderstand it easily, but it is also because of this that we remember it, and in remembering it, we can maybe begin to contemplate it and then maybe begin to understand it so that we contribute to what comes after us in a certain way, to have, muse power, passed on down through the generations. But adab, anyway, so it's a way of life, it's a way of being. You could call it also virtue. I like at some moment the word comportment, a way of comportment. I think it is something that Yeats could see, I don't know if there's any corresponding, vocabulary words that I can see right now at this moment. But when I think in Yeats's, kooky or kind of like visionary prose writing, it seems like he's trying to convey these conceptions, of character and of being, I would love to see an actor interpret Yeats's vision, but it would probably be too easy to overact about that, because it would be very kabuki-like, kind of like, ceremonial gestures and things like this. And so, because it's comportment, and for it to be art, it is somehow like making something of itself that will draw your attention as something out of the ordinary, and so in comportment, that's going to be probably like weird actions going on stage. But hey, that's what we come to the theater for, right? Well, we would, if we want to be sophisticated, But so comportment. And so how does he save lives? Well, here's what happens, here's what happens also. When it's an arduous thing, what Muhammad was gifted with, it was, revelation is like a UFO landing, in this way, it's like, it is announced, the shepherds, who watched their flocks by night, they saw the star in the sky and they were sore afraid. This is part of the Abrahamic gift, is this, like I was trying to say, the notion of this like stark revelation. Here it is, this is, forget about your ideas, forget about your theological speculations, forget how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, because that's them. Oh, but worse, that's who they serve, and then it speaks to you and it says, recite. And that's what it was like for Muhammad, and he did, with the help and intercession of a lifetime of learning and understanding and acting in the world. And, but, always, so arduous in a certain sense. And yet, okay, so then many, many things happened, but I want to say to you that Muhammad had people around him, his friends, Muhammad's friends were around him, and it wasn't like, oh, when the revelation was there, he was, this was when he was fulfilling his true nature. Of course it was, but it was also every other moment of his life as well, for it is a unity, right? The basic energy of life and of meaning. It is a unity. And so Muhammad's actions were creative, on all these different kind of levels, so much so that the actions became part of another tradition, the hadith, right? The sayings of Muhammad, which there's an entire, many inspired kind of formulations of understanding related to the hadith, as well as the Quran, as well as to the legal traditions, the interpretation of certain kind of laws, and also the science of analogy, which is so important, in the development of the ongoingness of the styles of thinkers like Ibn Khaldun. And it comes from, so many things. But what Al-Ghazali, to get back to him and the way that he saved lives, with his teaching of the notions of adab, of courtesy, of bearing, right, of comportment, really, you say, eternity is in love with the productions of time. Well, the productions of time, if they are undertaken by, a human personality in harmony with these notions of the comportment, which is virtuous and that which leads to, salvation and understanding and true being, not only in this world, but in the afterlife, then it is a worthy surface upon which to build. It is a worthy surface becoming a facet, which becoming a facet becomes a depth in the gem, of this expression of human consciousness, if it is something like this. And it's also a pinion for orthodoxy. Oh, we're supposed to think, hey, wait a minute, I'm romantic. Isn't orthodoxy something that is like, well, of course, as Ibn Khaldun and Lao Tzu also kind of imply, you can't have heterodoxy without orthodoxy. And the reason that these principles are here is because they were not here before. They were original utterances, and as such, they became like the notions upon which other kind of like forms and ideas could be related to in such a way that this production of time could continue to sustain the love of eternity down through the ages. And that is orthodoxy. It is a way kind of like that. And so because of that, Al-Ghazali was able to nourish people's spirits, I'm telling you, and there's no way to quantify this, but because of Al-Ghazali's input, whether or not you understood him or not, because these kind of books are, they're never read by all that very many people, but they don't work in the soul in that way, evidently, as far as I can tell, but it's about this thing where if you are able to see this in a sustained way so that it becomes familiar to you and it continues to reveal itself to you, you become less vulnerable. Remember, these are charged nervous systems, and the vertebra, protect, the bones protect, but there's a lot of exposed space in between. There ain't much cover. When you're out there, in the open desert, it's you and the sun and the wind, and Lord knows what's coming out of human beings, and the features of the landscape and the spirits of all the different worlds now, they're out there too. That could be a whirlwind out there, could be a mirage out there, it could be something else entirely, and it may not be good, and it may not be able to be overcome. You also look at things that way. Whatever this is coming at me, if I can overcome it now, I won't have to think about learning about it anymore. I'll just set it aside. There is that in people also. Adab is a way to understand that as well. In human nature, character development, character training, all of this. Why? Okay, why does it save lives? Well, if people go off the deep end, especially when there ain't much cover, out there in the open country, of the seeking nervous system, when the true things that you think you see, you actually come to learn are veiled by your subjective personality. And sometimes your learning of that becomes, what you actually contribute, in a way that you never thought, and people go off the deep end then. And people go off the deep end in good ways too. People go off the deep end in good ways too, and make utterances in the public square that are one with the way that they are living their life, that are one with what the culture needs at that moment, and they end up getting, punished by the authorities in various ways, as happened to al-Hallaj in Baghdad, in the 9th century. Has happened to many a Sufi, has happened to Isa bin Maryam, and it happened to Paul of Tarsus, and, name them, of course, Catherine, and, bound to the wheel, and again and again and again. It becomes its own mythology, of course, sometimes in less than wholesome ways, you might say. But did all these people go off the deep end? No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something actually Ibn Khaldun went into a little bit more. Not everybody can become a heroic martyr, But if people can be saved from the fate of a heroic martyr when it's really not their fate, that's saving lives in a good way, because the way that it is, and it's always been this way in human nature. People are undertaking fates that are not theirs because they feel like they have to, because they don't know themselves any other way. And it is adab, these religious and spiritual notions of comportment that, can be offered in cultures, so that, the richness is there for the human mind, to learn from and be educated by. And Al-Ghazali makes it possible, for this to be like a stabilizing force, so that people don't become, suffer fates that are not their own out of ignorance, as I was, saying, or become subjected to superstitions, in all the various ways, or just to basic, ignorance and mistakes and all of these things, all these unreal kind of influences that cause, all of this pain in human consciousness. And this is like where Al-Ghazali locates this thing, which is called a form of religious being within the Abrahamic setting of Sufism, this kind of way of spiritual understanding, which also provides all these historical figures, which create all these controversies and in history that people can study, hopefully, and they will educate themselves, understanding that the opinions about them and the prevailing judgments about what was right and what was wrong about this are constantly changing, and it's important to have an awareness of how this stuff is studied, so that it becomes a source of understanding of the nature of human existence. So, from Muhammad and his friends, and Muhammad's revelation and all the different ways that it was communicated, and then all the different kind of cultural forms and religious forms that were established, and all the different kind of questions that were asked and answers, and the conceptual material that was available to them in the revelation, contained in the Quran, this like living kind of like psychic form, comes out. And Ibn Khaldun is looking at it in this way also. But then he also will go from there, and say, yes, God is a name to some, and to others God is a word. And when we see it that way, then we see these forms, these actions, and these notions. And there are certain things that are common to both that we can see, and in a subtle way we can measure and trace. And it is Ibn Khaldun's contribution, that makes it possible to speak of it in this way. Now, he also investigated error, superstition, the dark arts. Also, he had much to say. It's very entertaining, some of those things he say. I'll try to limit it to just a few little things. This was a time, we're fine with time. This is a time when we're fine with time chronologically. But, there are those who are not fine with time, even though for a while they're rolling in dough. I'm talking about, riches and the rising and falling of civilizations and the actions of Abbasiyya, as theorized by Ibn Khaldun, in the ways that these destructive events happen in civilizations, and the rich are overcome, and the walls are broached and toppled, and all kinds of bad things happen. Fortunes that are made can be lost. This happens again and again. And because of this, in the shifting sands of the desert, where the winds blow from all directions, and sometimes you don't even know if they're winds or not, especially if they're whirling, and sometimes you don't know what that is out there, even if it's only a mirage. And if it's only a mirage, does it have a cause? And can the cause be described in such a way that it becomes an insight into the nature of a reality that produces evil as well as good? Can it be that way? In the desert, it can be that way. But that's where treasure is found too. When civilizations fall, riches are secreted away and hidden away. And remember also, 800 years ago, in this part of the world, Rome falling, and all that implies, it happened yesterday. Day before yesterday, it was Egypt and mighty Pharaoh and these pyramids. And all along in those times were all the civilizations that we're not so familiar with, in our part of the world, in our part of the country. But I'm talking about, the Phoenicians and, the Achaeans and the kings of Tyrus with their convict list, and the Zoroastrian magi and the Phoenician sea rovers, who would even kidnap Dionysus, and thus become part of a great myth, But so these warrior cultures, right? These questing, violent cultures, and these acquisitive and rapacious and with an eye for gold, they all seem to have that. And sometimes they become kings, and then that falls. But the treasures are still out there in the desert. Ibn Khaldun, one of the questions that he had for the health of the society, we will understand the health of it in a different way, but for Ibn Khaldun, it was literal. Treasure hunting is a bane, as a harmful thing to society. There are many ways we can look at treasure hunting. Maybe there are treasures out there, no doubt. The civilizations fell just yesterday, as we know. But who would be so foolish as to make a map and leave hints? Who is so foolish, who would otherwise be so clever as to amass such a treasure, and then when it comes time for them to secret their treasure away, they provide cryptic puzzles to help you find it? This is ridiculous. But this is also another way in which Ibn Khaldun, when I say he is contemporary, I tell you that he is. When I say he's modern, we're not modern, not no more, and that could be a good thing, I don't know. But Ibn Khaldun definitely, we can look at his perspective and also see something about the medieval nature of understanding is such that it gives us an insight into how actually dangerous so much is that we would otherwise scoff at, when he talks about certain things, except he'll put it in these really terms that seem fantastical to us. And yet he's reasoning about real harms and real benefits, such as if you go treasure hunting, you leave yourself open to all kinds of evil intrigue and dark magics and unhealthy influences. And the reason why is these are usually ill-gotten gains. Because of the nature of the way civilizations rise and fall, these are ill-gotten gains that are amassed and gathered, and they are protected. But because they are gotten in an unwholesome way, they are maintained and protected in an equally unwholesome way. It's a law of nature. So you go hunting for treasure, you undergo exposure of yourself in vulnerable places to curses, to death-dealing automata, to traps, to ghosts, to unfortunate circumstance, to the evil, that can be operationalized, powered by such things as greed and envy, and vengeance, and all of these things, all the things that, came out of, what Pandora was given to open. All of these things, that come, that could be something that is out there when you say, I want what glitters to my eye. You go seek that, and you face, peril. You face unhealth. You face what is contrary to adab, you know. And yet you face fascination. You face compulsion, which seems to be beckoning. You face illusion and mirage and hunger and thirst and all of these different things, and malevolence of human agency sometimes, and of sometimes through human agency, supernatural agency. This is medieval, but this is also stuff that can still scare us. And there's a meaning in that. There's a meaning in that, and that could be explored in many ways also. And then at last Ibn Khaldun says, hey, and if they find the gold, it's bad for society. You know, this is ill-gotten gain, gained from once more. And as such, that form of seeking value perpetuates itself in the society. Ooh, this has a lot of metaphorical implications, doesn't it? And for Ibn Khaldun, he's speaking of it, and he knows it's metaphorical, and he knows we are to understand it in this way so that we can understand the way it's specific to our times, and that's very good, and then there's other forms that I want to mention about that. Let's put that this way, in this sense, when Ibn Khaldun is speaking of certain kinds of superstitions, he will allude to a larger generalization, a larger kind of anagogical form as well, I suppose, of this idea that what is happening is the manipulation of illusion, the conscious and practiced, scary as that is, and skillful manipulation of illusion at the service of the subjective personality, i.e. the ego, i.e. malice or greed or vengeance or ignorance or unhingedness, of unnatural excitement, of a head burnt, by the rays of the sun, because it's a desert land, of a forehead, too close to the hot sands, and hearing an energy and a force that comes to it in that direction from the sands of the desert, very, very vulnerable. But it's all about the manipulation of illusion. So let's draw an analogy from that to something seemingly unrelated, just in the way that Ibn Khaldun might do, because he's a bit of a futurist also. And he understood this too, as it's also an art. A historian, it is said, will imagine the past, will conceive of the past, but in conceiving of the past, which can be done through all different kinds of ways, the imagination creates some kind of image of the future, because things are contemporaneous in the unity of the creation, of the actual creation. Time and space are illusions. And yet there are places where the tissue is thinner, and where the veil, you might say, is thinner. And when we come to such places, we're, vulnerable to all kinds of bad things, but we have faith in our God and in what we have learned to come to value. We have faith in the intelligence that we know is real, and in the love that guides us and shapes us and gives form to this intelligence in such a way that we will have the discernment to see, not today, Mr. Devil, not today, Mr. Malevolent Jinn. I'm sure that you all have your jobs, but I will stay on my job here, which is my course, is to listen and to come to know what it is what it is rightful for me to come to know, as I've been taught, by Al-Ghazali, and by the teachers of wisdom that abound, the greatest utterly unknown, of course, because they say themselves they're not even there. And so this is around, and this is good and helpful, in the society. So we live, though contemporaneously, we live in a time when, we're not bedeviled by devilishness in that way, because we're, secular, we are cosmopolitan, we are rational, and we are advanced technically. We are so advanced technically because of our skill, which is real intelligence, not like that kind of like muck-a-muck, that you speak of, which, has to do with people who aren't even alive. It's the practices of the weak. It's not conducive to the amassing of a material fortune. It is just not any of those things. But well, I don't know where I was going with that. I guess I just went and refuted myself, perhaps. But there is that, which is, I don't know, maybe I'll just come back to it. Or maybe this is a point where I should just depart from that for a moment. No. I'm back again. I'm not back again. They're back again. The voices out there that are saying this, after they refuted me, well, now they're saying they're refuting themselves, and we're gonna watch, because this is what they're saying. They're saying we have externalized our consciousness. We have not only externalized the very material of our imagination, but we have the ability to connect ourselves with everything that is happening all around the world in the form of this exteriorization of our consciousness. We could call it the television, we could call it the TV, we could call it the computer, we could call it the internet, we could call it the 24-hour news cycle, we could call it actually what comes to occupy our daily spoken consciousness, word on the street. We could call it word on the street. We could all these things that are actually influenced by the society of the spectacle, basically, as Guy Debord put it, who it's a comprehensive kind of like metaphorical, and yet conceptually very fundamental kind of insight when he said, he's the one, I believe, who gave us this notion of the society of the spectacle as a depiction of ourselves. That's us, and that's an illusion. And that's an illusion manipulated in all these different kind of ways. So is that not a form of sorcery? But, can we just simply by the virtue of the magic that we have learned just from being, here, and interested in these subjects, can we allow some of the loadedness of these words in the public consciousness to kind of just demagnetize itself, which you can do at an instant of time? As we come to understand them, the awareness of what is dispels the illusion of what seems to be. You see, this is how it is. But if we're too vulnerable, if we're too excited, if we want something from it, we are subject to those illusions, and then it affects, all the subsequent thoughts. It's like in a mathematical equation. If there's something off in one of the steps, that will not go away, it seems like. And what a thing. And yet we have to, once we are aware of that, though, then that becomes that's what we need to pay attention to, with our educated quality of attention, educated from the inside, and so we live in the society of the spectacle, and that is the illusion, and Ibn Khaldun would provide us, if we want to creatively work it out, with a kind of a diagnosis of that. And the diagnosis is once more we find it in William Blake, who is also a conceptual, primordial conceptualist in the same way that Ibn Khaldun is. So when I say that there's something poetic, in the energy of meaning and the muse power and all of that stuff, well, I mean by this a certain kind of originality of conceptual power, which, as an analogy related to something seemingly farther afield, you see in a consciousness like Walt Whitman or William Blake or any number of others of Heraclitus, because what I'm saying is the concepts seem to have this polyvalent quality. They seem to be of the vibration of the very nervous system of ourselves as, human consciousness tapped into that which is universal to us with a desire to see the truth of some of these ideas in this way. And when we do this, we find that Ibn Khaldun is there as our teacher, And so there. Now, here's what I think I might do really quickly, because I think that there still is a little bit of time to do this, as always. Surface after surface, transforming into depth, I do need to go on for just a little bit, but in such a way as to give you something, a more direct kind of inspiration, in the Quran, what we have in it that's inspiring poetically and mysterious because it is a revelation. It gives us a flavor of that in its form, the directness of the utterance. I don't see it. I see it in other things. This is like any original work of literature. You see it in other works, but then when you come to the original source of it, you just know that you are seeing it where it came from, and so you are recognizing what is universal about what used to be for you just the strikingly particular, the strikingly particular in instance after instance, in occasion after occasion, in event after event. I can hear Ibn Khaldun as a juridical thinker, reminding me on some level that tradition and event are two fundamentally different ways of looking at causes and actions, And so, but I don't know if I can explain that. And so I will just, leave it at that, because somehow, that is a one good line, that could be in there in this kind of like sinuous way. Also the form of Walt Whitman, and sometimes the form of William Blake, which they derived from the corresponding holy book of utterances of one of the other branches of the Abrahamic revelation, the Abrahamic gift, which is so great, the Bible, and the cadences and the thought and the prophetic phraseology and the conceptual primordiality, and down to the actual surface rhythms and actual surface external manifestation of style, in the phrases and things, is, the universal source of what is so compelling in the particular that we see in thinkers like Whitman and Blake and, Ibn Khaldun in their respective holy books, their roots and their relations to their respective holy books. Okay. So let's take a quick visit to Ibn Khaldun, where he's speaking as, a poetic writer and generalist. And then, as much as it can be done, I would like to go into like some things just like as takeaway ideas, maybe. And sometimes in the takeaway ideas, you can find your way back, to the original inspiration that was coming to you. I really am interested in finding this particular thing I wrote down, and finally I did. That's why I was turning those pages. I'm not the first one who said this in the book. There is an energy unique all to itself in the turning of the pages. Of course there is. What is it that you well, I'm going to have to tell you in this way, because I wrote it down. I knew I wouldn't remember otherwise. As I was walking, I asked myself, or it said to myself, you'll never get there without doing just this. But if you do just this, you'll never get there. Let me say it to you again. This is a form, basically. This is just a phrase, and I didn't have to think it. I just had to remember it. And thank goodness the writing does the remembering for me, I'm embarrassed to admit. You'll never get there without doing just this, but if you do just this, you'll never get there. What's the key? The answer? It's taking a step. To take a step. You'll never get there without taking just a step. But if you take just a step, you'll never get there. See? This is the kind of way where we have to conceive of like, this succession of forms, which is utterly unique to itself, which is how time first appears to us, first comes to us in a way. But I'm going to remember to read this, but I first want to tell you that Al-Ghazali, that hero to Ibn Khaldun, we only have a fraction of what he actually wrote. It is said that Al-Ghazali wrote 999 works, 999 works about the qualities of God and the way that they were unique to themselves, only in all these other ways and in all these other renditions, such that something in his own mind was not transformed. So much so that he went on a journey, and I don't know where he was going, but he put all of his books that he had written, all 999 of them, into a wagon and hauled it across the land. And he came to a river. My gosh, what a wonderful thing to find in this part of the world, what a very source of life, Perhaps it was in Isfahan. Perhaps it was like farther north of where Ibn Khaldun was, but he was by a river. And he said, now this is a beautiful place. This is where I will come to make my book, my ultimate book. It will be my 1,000th book. And I will write this book with the ink on the pages, generating my own form of energy by turning the pages. I'll start with pages that are empty, and then I'll turn the pages and fill those pages, and then I'll take the next page, and as the pages turn black with ink, the heart shall turn pure with devotion. Is that what he was thinking? He maybe thought he was supposed to think that way, but somehow he didn't really think it, because as it was manifested to him like a revelation. And here's the form it takes as a revelation. Ibn Khaldun was writing the words perhaps even on the last page of his 1,000th book, and then he was going to just say, oh, it wasn't going to be his last book. I don't know if it was or not, but what it was for him was, I have said everything that can be said. I have written everything that can be written about this divine unity. I have done this as I fill the pages of this, my 1,000th book. I've said it all. This was the idea that was in his mind, and perhaps it was connected to the inspiration that he was writing about. He was putting it down on the page, and in the midst of it, suddenly a drop fell on the page. A drop of water fell on the page. He looked up, and there was a bird up there. It was a tiny bird. Perhaps it was a hummingbird. And the hummingbird had on its beak a drop of water. It had a couple other drops of water on its beak, and the hummingbird shook its little head again, and 2 more drops of water fell down on the pages of this book. And then the hummingbird flew to the river, dipped its beak into the river, and came back to the same branch and shook its little head so that 3 more drops fell down on the pages of the book. And, Al-Ghazali said, this messes up my ink before it has dried. This is like clear, but my ink is dense. I mean, what are you doing putting this on my book? And, why was he asking this? Well, because he knew the language of the birds. That's why he was asking that. So he inquired in a way that he had been educated to inquire. He knew the language of the birds. And so he said to the bird in the bird's own language, why are you doing this? What are you doing? And the bird said, well, it seems to you that I am dripping water on the pages of your book. Yeah, it seems to me. Aren't things as they seem? Asks the great Al-Ghazali. And the bird says, I'll tell you what I'm really doing, rather than we argue about what seems to be or what doesn't seem to be, right? It doesn't matter what's real or not inside the gates of Eden, as someone in the future will say, this little bird said. I'll tell you who the little bird really was, if I remember. But the little bird said, what's really going on here? Al-Ghazali, calling him by name, I am emptying this river with my beak. I am emptying this river with my beak is what I'm doing. And Al-Ghazali said, you've revealed yourself as the nature of an animal. Have I? Said the hummingbird, a seeming animal. A hummingbird is an animal, but this was a seeming hummingbird. Let me put it that way. Let's be a little bit more exact about that. I think we can. The hummingbird said, this seeming hummingbird, which only seemed to be that way, actually. I'll tell you if I remember. But the hummingbird said, I'm emptying this river. I'm emptying this river. Well, Al-Ghazali might have said, if he had had a different disposition, oh, you're emptying the river in the pages of my book? I wonder how I can make that into an artistic expression, But Al-Ghazali wasn't quite that kind of thinker. He's great, but he wasn't like a painter necessarily. He wasn't a calligrapher, I mean, a calligrapher can do things with flowing that a river can do. But Al-Ghazali, that wasn't his gift, at that time. Anyway, you've revealed yourself as what? You can't empty that river. You are in error, O bird. You will never empty that river. And the bird said, well, I will answer your charge with a strong statement of my own. You have said everything about the divine unity. If you have said everything about the divine unity, I know you say you have and you think you have, But if you have said everything about the divine unity, then I will empty this river with my beak, and I better get at it, because you've already done something that I'm going to do something that I say I'm going to do. And it was then, of course, that Al-Ghazali, it wasn't anything that made him run naked through the streets, It wasn't because, he had, he hadn't done any of the things that people do to themselves in order to, see visions, and it certainly wasn't undergoing a fate that was not his, but he was seeing what he had not seen before, and then he realized, you're not a bird. No, said, you can understand my language, not because you can understand the language of the birds, said the seeming bird, but because you, Al-Ghazali, can understand the language of the angels. I am Gabriel. I am the angel Gabriel. I came to illustrate something to you that I knew you would not understand in any other way. And then, tweet, tweet, the bird flew away. And that was when Al-Ghazali threw all his books in the river. He himself returned the ink to the water from which it came. And then he wrote books like The Refutation of Error and on the, whatever they calls it, the mistakes of the philosophers, and on the notions of adab, of comportment, of bearing, of virtue, of consistency, of understanding, and all of these things that inspire not only bearing and consistency and personality and character, but also works of literature in the ways that they cohere. In the ways that the expressions of the ideas cohere together in the territory where Ibn Khaldun was an appreciator and a seer and an understander, which gives his work this element of creativity now, which I will just delineate to you, and then I know that I'll need to check my watch, and who knows what I might see and have to interpret as an action. But I must tell you, this is a quote from our man. He says, and I gave it a title that he would give it. This is a paragraph I copied from his great work, the Muqaddimah. Theory of specialization and perfection in learning. And Ibn Khaldun says, the perfect way of conveying ideas is eloquence. Eloquence is conformity of speech to the requirements of the situation. After the requirements of a given situation have thus been indicated, there come the diverse ways in which the mind moves among the ideas with the help of different kinds of word meanings. The different ways the mind moves around in this way also have their conditions and laws, which are like rules. They were made into a special craft and called the science of style. This is a nice takeaway. I think it's on page 453 of the, that translation of the Muqaddimah by Franz Rosenthal. The translation of the Muqaddimah by Franz Rosenthal. And I just want to say, I will read it again. I'm sorry, but, repetition too is necessary. But I will also tell you, though, there's a hadith where Muhammad said, in poetry there is wisdom. In eloquence there is magic. In poetry there is wisdom. In eloquence there is magic. Or you could say, in poetry is wisdom. You could say, in eloquence is magic. You could say, in eloquence is magic, But remember, Ibn Khaldun himself, as we kind of looked at a little bit earlier, with his ideas about superstition and stuff, So it's not that kind of magic Muhammad was talking about. But perhaps it's this kind of grace and beauty and ability, I think, actually to stay close to somebody as a thought, so that you'll know, when the ideas, are close to your soul, somehow the expression. The perfect way of conveying ideas is eloquence. Eloquence is conformity of speech to the requirements of the situation. I would say to you, when a shepherd in the desert calls his sheep home over broken ground, and he calls out to them, and they all come home over broken ground safely, and they go into his pen because they know the voice of their shepherd is calling them. And it is that sound, I think, that is speech that is to the requirements of the situation, right? That's an example. That's an example. But back to Ibn Khaldun's words. After the requirements of a given situation have thus been indicated, there come the diverse ways in which the mind moves among the ideas with the help of different kinds of word meanings. I'm so glad somebody said that. The needs are seen, and as they are being met, the mind moves among different words and meanings of words in response to the situation. This is a beautiful explanation of the act of literature, the act of speech and the act of writing, and how they both exist as an action, and we learn it in this description. The diverse ways in which the mind moves, meeting the needs of the situation, among the ideas with the help of different kinds of word meanings. And these have their conditions and laws, which are like rules. And then they become a special craft, and it is called the science of style. That's good, because what makes it that way is its aptness to the needs of the moment, the inner needs of the moment, because William Blake seems to have something for the inner needs of the moment always when he says eternity is in love with the productions of time. And Ibn Khaldun says that that which is in touch with the needs of the moment is that which has style. And as an action, it is the action of the mind moving amidst the meanings of the words to make this act. Beloved, gaze in thine own heart. I just have to tell you this. Yeats, because I did mention him, Yeats's formulation conceptually was that of a tree, but it was an inner tree. And it had like a corollary in the world of illusion that was lifted to it, that was accessible and had its own kind of attraction, because the mind forms the world in the same way it sees untruth as it does in the way it sees truth. This is kind of like a secular understanding of what is common to the mind between its inspired state and its ungodly state. And so I just will have to tell you this. It's from Yeats. And it's always, and Ibn Khaldun, in the act of learning, the quality of roteness and rote learning is not how we look at it now. By the rote learning, it becomes a part of you. By the repetition, it becomes a part of you, because by the repetition, well, he has it this way. Your actions are the expression of your soul. Your actions are the expressions of your soul. A lovely generalization which means a great many things. But in the sense of rote learning, it means that something becomes a part of you in such a way that you can reenact it because it's become accessible to you somehow. And this is a way that the energy of the mind can be focused in a really original way that contributes to the culture, So for Yeats, it was the art of poetry, which he exemplifies with this. He wrote, "Beloved, gaze in thine own heart. The holy tree is growing there. From joy the holy branches start. From joy the holy branches start, and all the trembling flowers they bear. The changing colors of its fruit have dowered the stars with merry light. The surety of its hidden root has planted quiet in the night. The shaking of its leafy head has given the waves their melody, and made my lips and music wed, murmuring a wizard song for thee. There the loves a circle go, the flaming circle of our days, gyring, spiring to and fro in those great ignorant leafy ways, remembering all that shaken hair, and how the winged sandals dart. Thine eyes grow full of tender care. Beloved, gaze in thine own heart. Gaze no more in the bitter glass. The demons with their subtle guile lift up before us when they pass, or only gaze a little while. For there a fatal image grows that the stormy night receives, roots half hidden under snow, broken boughs and blackened leaves. For all things turn to barrenness. In the dim glass the demons hold, the glass of outer weariness, made when God slept in times of old. There through the broken branches go the ravens of unresting thought, flying, crying to and fro, cruel claw and hungry throat. Or else they stand and sniff the wind and shake their ragged wings, alas. Thy tender eyes grow all in kind. Gaze no more in the bitter glass. Beloved, gaze in thine own heart. The holy tree is growing there. From joy the holy branches start, and all the trembling flowers they bear. And so that's how that poem will be, put before you. And that as a takeaway, what is there, I believe, is the energy that makes it cohere in the mind so that the mind can carry it from place to place and time to time in, the journey of its own consciousness, is that which is closely akin and perhaps deeply related to the energy of meaning. Well, it would seem that Ibn Khaldun, his gift as a teacher, to us now is our ability to see things, to see our thoughts become conscious to us in this way, which we have been now. So I'm deeply grateful to his spirit for this and to what inspires it. So that then, is the point, right, where the hand lifts from the page. The temple bells have stopped, but the sound keeps coming out of the flowers, as Basho said, where the voice steps back to see, if it has contributed anything that is real and that trusts that it has. So that's the message. That's Ibn Khaldun, a little bit of that. I love to revisit it in whatever way I can. But for now, so long for now. And I thank you for your heroic listening. So, blessed be all of us in our work in this world. Thank you for your heroic listening. So long for now.